Hi. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolyn. It's really lovely to meet everyone on this beautiful sunny morning in Washington, D.C. Thank God for the sun, finally. For those of you who just joined us after our initial introductions, I'm Tonya Fitzpatrick. I'm the co-founder of World Footprints, based here in DC, and we're a socially conscious travel media platform, with our podcast being our foundational platform. I'm also a lawyer. I was a former appointee to as a delegate to the United Nations Commission on Women, and I hope to be appointed again in the near future. I'm a former White House appointee, serving as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Policy at the U.S. Department of Education. And all of that turned travel journalist. So we were at a meeting last night at the National Press Club with a group of Nordic diplomats and other journalists, and it seemed like everyone was a recovering journalist turned something else, and I'm a recovering lawyer turned travel journalist. So we all had a great laugh about that. But I share my background, my history as a backdrop to my belief in the transformative power of travel and the work I've come to do, which is really bridge travel and social impact. We're surrounded by a lot of noise. I actually love the term weeds. There are a lot of weeds growing around us. That could be, opinions of family and friends, social media, good Lord, other societal voices, family socialization. There's a lot that's being fed to us. And without knowing it, those things can actually shape our thoughts, our belief systems, our actions, our subconsciousness. And that can actually impact the way we show up in the world, especially when we travel. And sadly, our unconscious bias can really cheat us out of some wonderful experiences. And I want to kind of illustrate that thought with a couple of real life stories. The first story is one that I've told on the TEDx stage. I'm a 3-time TEDx speaker, and so I've spoken on TED stage and around the world because, and I've shared this story because it's very, very powerful. It's a story of a former podcast guest. This guest, her name is Renee Marie. She is an amazing jazz artist, and she actually left a very abusive marriage later in life. I think she's in her 40s or so, and revisited her love of music. And at the height of her career, as she was really starting to elevate, her manager booked her on a tour to Germany. Now, Renee she grew up in a kind of World War II era family. And when her manager said, you're going on a tour in Germany, oh my goodness, she fought back. And she fought back because it was her belief and understanding growing up in the era that she did, and with her parents, that one, as an African-American woman, she would not be accepted in Germany, and two, they wouldn't like jazz music. And so she fought her manager back and forth, and she finally relinquished and decided, I'm going to go, I'm going to lean into this travel experience, I'm going to give them the best shows of my life. And to her surprise, German people love jazz, and they really embraced her music, they embraced her. And she told me during our talk, she's like, Tonya, I'm so ashamed as an African-American woman who has grown up with a broad brush of, misconceptions or whatever painted on me. I did the same to a community. And do you know she's been back to Germany many, many times over, and today she actually calls Germany her second home, and I think she has actually a second home in Germany. And I love sharing that story because it just really illustrates, how travel can not only transform ourselves, but other people. Another story that I've shared is my own, as somebody who illuminates our common humanity through our work and really talks about the power that travel has to bring communities together. Yours truly is flawed. And this is my story. Years ago, when I first started traveling, I was living in England and visiting. I had friends all over Europe. And so as a poor student in England, I would go and visit friends and have a kind of a free place to live and really enjoy. And on one occasion, I decided to take a train from Vienna, Austria to Budapest, Hungary. And I got on this train and it wasn't that crowded, I didn't think. And I was in a car by myself, a car that sits 6 people. And as the train started to move, a family of 6 enters my car looking for places to sit. And I listened to their accent and I recognized a South African accent. And I thought, holy cow, this isn't going to be good for me. And so I offered to leave and give the family the space. And just to explain, at that point, I had never been to South Africa. I was, a very young traveler, just starting out. And all I knew about South Africa was apartheid and, the oppression under apartheid. But I recognized the Afrikaans dialect and accent. And so when I offered to leave, the family said, particularly the mother, there's a mother and children and some of their friends, they were my age. They insisted that I stay. And so 4 of them stayed in my car and 2 of them went off elsewhere. And they engaged me in conversation, and I decided, let's just talk. I mean, I'm from Michigan, and I say Midwest nice. I'll say hi to a tree, and so I, was happy to engage them in conversation. And by the end of the short train trip, we had developed such a bond. They actually invited me to share a hotel room with the mother and to tour Budapest with them. Because I had absolutely no plans. I just hopped on a train and I was just gonna wing it. And so because, I decided to lean into that experience, I saw more of Budapest than I would have on my own. And they introduced me to something I really came to love, and that's cherry brandy. And that kind of opened up a Pandora's box for me. So, has anyone ever tried cherry brandy? Well, I haven't had it in years, but back then it was my go-to. I fell in love with that liqueur. And so I wanted to share those stories to start our conversation. Just to show that when you show up and do something that we call ground truthing, finding your own truth on the ground about another culture, about a destination, that's where you uncover those gems, those travel gems, and build those beautiful relationships. And so, because this is a conversation, I wanted to ask you all, is there a travel experience you've had where you've actually been confronted by your own unconscious bias? And how did you react to that situation? Anyone? I know this is a safe place and there's no judgment space, which is why I wanted to share my personal experience when I was slapped in the face with my unconscious bias. And so, I'd invite you to share. And, if you're not comfortable, just reflect on that privately.
I think I just have a comment. First of all, I'm part Hungarian, so cherry brandy was cough medicine as I was growing up. I think almost everywhere we go, we sometimes enter with a bias, only because of whatever media we've been inundated with. But I think sometimes, we enter a country and we immediately go, oh, I've got to be careful that this, and this, and this doesn't happen to me. Or, if I go to Mexico, well, somebody's going to try and rob me, and I'm going to end up with the cartels, or, and I think we almost have I think it's an unconscious bias because of what we've heard of in the media, or what the stereotype has been given to us. And I don't think we necessarily go in immediately thinking these things, but I think there's, just kind of stuff that's stuck in the back of our heads that we almost have to overcome. And it's here, living in Mexico, I see this constantly on Facebook with people saying, well, I read in the paper about this going on and this going on, and is it safe to come? And it's like, well, if you're going to Puerto Vallarta, you're hardly, you're pretty much safe. If you're going to maybe, the border towns, maybe not. But it also depends, kind of like what you're doing or what. But I think we come sometimes with a misconception that you go, oh, it's okay, nothing really happened. Oh, I didn't know it was going to be so safe and good, or the people were going to be so nice, or this and that. And I think that's just from how we see things so much now, because there's such an online presence for every little thing.
Right. Oh, yes, Diane?
It's interesting, Christine, that you say that, because it's a really good point, because you talk Mexico as the example, and it's a good one, because I had those same thoughts. Oh, I don't know, I really want to go. And I'm a person who's traveled a lot. I know how to assess my risk. I'm fairly comfortable doing it, but I now have a reticence of Mexico because of everything I'm reading. But my point is, how do you, and I'm doing India in September, and I've got all of these, and I'm not hesitant. My family's telling me I'm crazy, but anyways, I'm doing it anyways. But I know there are risks. There are certain risks in some countries that are not in others. They're just different. Some of them are worse than others. But I guess my point is, how do you not let that concern with the risks overtake your desire to learn more about the world and to travel, and basically not poo-poo the risk, but learn to manage it and not be afraid of it. But some risks sometimes are not worth taking. You know what I mean? Let me take a step back. For example, Mexico, the crime, all the other stuff. India, women traveling alone, the safety of women traveling alone. So I'm reading all these articles about, how to travel, but then I say to myself, am I going to have a bias when I'm there, that I'm going to be afraid to approach anyone? Because, everything when you say, be careful of strangers, even if whether they're locals or they're international travelers, beware of all of them. So now I'm thinking, am I going to be afraid to approach anybody? And it's not my style. I like to meet people when I travel. So how do you manage that? The fact that being conscious of that you will have a bias, that you do have a bias because of everything that you've read. And I guess, how do you manage that? How do you address that concern? Not be overly concerned with it, but still address it at the same time. You can't ignore it, because there could be a serious risk somewhere. So I guess that's all I want to say. But Christine, your point brought that up for me, is that, yes, I do have a bias. I recognize it now. I do. It's a bias. It's not just the fact that I've read stuff and I'm conscious of it. I think I do have a bias because of everything I've read, you know?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I recently was in New York, and because every time I read the paper, there's somebody being pushed in the subway and stuff. And I was taking the subway and I was like, oh, back against the wall, back against the wall, you know? And I thought, oh my God, relax, you know, right? But it was just, and the place I was staying, I was cat sitting for a friend. And I was like, oh, is it okay for me to be on the subway at 11 o'clock at night? You know, because I'd read all this and I thought, oh my God, you know, like here, you know, and you know, there's things that would happen like that anywhere in the world, because there's always, you know, people that are you know, slightly, you know, a little crazy. But it immediately, as soon as I got in the subway, I was like, you know, right? And and I thought, oh, you got to relax. This is silly.
But you know, it's funny you should say that, because I just got back from France. I did exactly the same thing in France. And I've been there lots of times. I've traveled lots of places. I didn't want to get on a subway late at night. I was going to take a cab, and I thought, this is really stupid, Diane. Come on, seriously. And I felt perfectly safe. I felt safer at night, I think, than during the day when I was crushed in the subway, you know. And during the day, I'm checking my pockets all the time. And, you know, like, to me, those are not the worst biases. The worst, to me, it's the biases that prevent me from meeting people, talking to people. You know, am I going to be concerned about who I meet now, you know? So anyways, that's just my
Diane, I have a funny Paris subway that segs into what you're saying right now. We're traveling from the airport to where we were staying, and I was trying to manage my big suitcase, my little suitcase, and two young men came from behind and grabbed my suitcases and down the stairs. Now, I'm from New York, so I'm thinking, thief, 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 I'm gonna run out. All of them, they're taking my suitcases. And all they were two nice boys seeing an older lady and taking her suitcases down the stairs.
Sandra, same thing happened to me, exactly the same thing. And I went, oh my God. He's down the stairs and I'm still up here. He's gonna be gone with my suitcase in a minute. Yeah,
obviously, they've been taught well by their parents about properly for a lady. So yeah, that's a bias. I grew up in New York, and somebody told me also about numbers. When you think about, you read something in the paper, but you forget there's 25 million people that live in New York City. So if you took all the newspapers in Canada and you added up how many things happen, you have to get relative to. My father got on the subway from Times Square to home every single night for 30 years. He's never had a problem. But what I was going to say about the bias was two things. One was about a trip to Vietnam. And I never realized how much the US media had corrupted my thoughts about what people are like in other countries. Having lived through the Vietnam War, I thought of enemy. And I couldn't believe how kind and wonderful and sweet and gentle they were. And then hearing their story about the American war, learning how they were overrun by the Chinese and the French and how everybody tried to attack them, you start to look totally differently at your bias. And we overran their country. So you have to switch your brain around, and you only do this by traveling and learning. And the one other travel person told me, don't leave Vietnam without drinking their coffee from a certain coffee shop, Starbucks, and only drink Vietnamese coffee. So total turnaround just by traveling. And the same thing about China, where I imagined communist China and people having all their rights taken away and living horribly and being poor and whatever. And then seeing people lined up on Sunday to take their kids for extra classes at school so they can get into a better high school, so they can get into a better college, buying condos and this whole other world, the entrepreneurialness of them. So it's really by travel that you get rid of the biases that you've had.
Absolutely. And I have a story I'll share about China a little bit later, but I see Marinelle has her hand up.
Yeah. Hi guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Filipino by birth. I actually grew up in the Philippines, and I guess I want to share from the other side in terms of viewpoint, because I'm also a journalist, a travel writer, and also have a mountain trekking company, and I've been trekking. Mountains are my thing. So I've been all over places, different places. But as a Filipino, I grew up in a country where on the news, Philippines has been targeted as very violent, and with the current administration, there's a lot of like negative publicity about it. But I grew up in that country, and here's the thing. I mean, when I'm always puzzled why the media talks about certain countries in a certain way, and I think we have to ask ourselves who's writing these articles, what are their biases, are these people even living in the country? Because as a journalist, that's why the reason why I'm a journalist, because I want to deconstruct the narratives of colonialism and imperialism of these writers, because we still have a lot of narratives in the industry where we're talking about the same stories about the countries that are from the south, like we're talking about Africa and Asian countries as being backward still, who are being violent, being unsafe, being uncivilized. These narratives still exist. And so I think for me, it's easy to dismiss all these like media stuff about Mexico and all these places, because you have to go to the root of where this information is coming from. And what I've learned really is a lot of the writers, they don't even live in that country. They don't even talk to the local people even, which is possible to do these days because there are so many expats all over the world. I live in Peru, and no one ever asked me to comment about the issues here and the concerns that people have. They just write about Peru, and if they see something dangerous, they write about it, but they never talk to the local people. So I think, to be honest, I think my take on media and how they talk badly about countries, I honestly think 90% of the time, it's not the reality that you see on the ground. And I think on that issue, as someone who lived in a country like the Philippines for part of my life, but also someone who's also now living in Peru and have been living in Mongolia and other places where people have. So I don't think you should concern yourself much about that. If anything, you should do your independent research, ask expats, ask people in that country how it's truly like on the ground, because it's so different. When Lima was changing president, in my village here in Cusco, we weren't affected at all. Everything was fine. There was no violence, there were no political issues. So I honestly think that we need to challenge the media more than anything. That's what we need to do at this point to what the truth is.
Amen.
So let's not let ourselves be brainwashed by those things. To be honest, I'm kind of tired of having Philippines having that reputation. It's a beautiful country. It's safe. People are warm. Those are truths that I've discovered as a Filipina, but I'm also telling you exactly from direct source what it's really about. So.
And Mary, thank you so much for that. Yeah, one of the things that I've shared as well is that, and that's why we talk about ground truthing. Find your own truth, because what you're reading, what you're seeing it's not necessarily your truth. And when my husband and I have covered the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Rio de Janeiro and Sochi, we came back, and actually even whilst there shared how our truth did not mirror the narratives that were being spewed through media. And we know why media does that. It's sensationalization, and it generates revenue. It's profit before truth. And so thank you for that. Before we move on, I wanted to ask if Mary or Karen, Sandra, Christine, and Diane, and all you guys packed in a lot, and I'm going to try to remember everything to respond to, but Karen, Carolyn, Susan, Mary, any comments?
I've often observed it's the press that's the biggest obstacle to people getting a comprehensive view of other countries. I remember being in Jordan and Israel. Well, in Jordan, there were no tourists. There were whole villages that were wiped out because tourists wouldn't go there because of the Western press. And I think the press are often totally irresponsible for some of the stuff they spread about other countries. Like even coming back from Mexico in February, I was on a G Adventures trip, and the stigma that against Mexico is really, really unfortunate. Even when I was going to Mexico, I have 3 friends in my bridge club who were travel agents. I said, I'm going to Mexico. You're going, don't go. I mean, no kidding. I thought, all right, not listening to these folks. They had been so swayed by the press about Mexico that they were astonished that I was going there. I'm thinking, give me it. I mean, really, this is ridiculous, ridiculous. Terrible.
Yeah. Mary, Carolyn, Sue? So, kind of aligned with what we've talked about with Mexico, I mentioned Rio de Janeiro, and as you all may remember, the media was so focused on the crime in Brazil during the games and the Zika virus, the Zika mosquito. Mm. And we, my husband and I, we decided to go, just as we decided to go to Sochi when Russia first invaded Crimea. We decided to go to Rio, and what we discovered and what we shared was that, first of all, the Zika mosquito was concentrated in an entirely different part of the country. We were there for 3 weeks, and we saw 2 mosquitoes in 1 taxi cab, and I smashed them right away, and that was our experience with the Zika mosquito. But the media harped on those 2 things so much that there were athletes who worked their tail off to qualify to compete in those games who decided not to go because they were so frightened. And even with the crime, Ian and I walked through a favela. Now, every favela, there are bad elements everywhere, right? There's bad elements in DC. There's, people talk about my hometown of Detroit, and, I can tell a whole different story about Detroit. But in any event, Ian and I walked through a favela on our own, and do you know what we discovered in that favela? They have an arts program. They have a partnership with a Sheraton hotel that's at the bottom of the mountain with a high school. So they're teaching hospitality. People don't share those stories about the favelas that are ridden with drugs and crime. And, not saying there isn't crime, but the reality is, there may be a little bit of drug trading, but none of those residents want the police presence, and so they don't do things that attract that level of police presence. And as we were walking around, I'm photographing the street art. I have my nice Nikon camera out. There's no police anywhere to be seen in the favela, and nobody bothered us, and so I think when you're traveling places, Diane, you asked, how do you balance safety with, perception and what have you? I think it really takes a level of discernment and common sense. Wherever you travel, whether it's domestic travel, any community, you have to, exercise awareness about your surroundings, common sense, and not take unnecessary risk, but not also hold yourself back from meeting other people. I lived for a semester. I did a semester of law in Shanghai, China, and every single bloody morning, wake up to propaganda spewing through the streets, and I have no idea what was being messaged through the streets. But what I do know is that when I interacted with other Chinese students on the campus, particularly during a couple of meetups they had every week called English Speaking Corner. And we, they would ask about pop culture. A couple of them were fixated on Michael Jackson back in the day. But, it was also their chance to practice their English. And, when I had that opportunity to show them a different face of what America looks like, that broadened their perspective and their ideals on America. And and that kind of leads into something else I wanted to share with you is there's something going on today, I think, that is fueling unconscious bias against a community, and it's related to the war in Ukraine. I don't know if I mentioned, but I lived in St. Petersburg when Putin was deputy mayor. So I'm kind of dating myself, sadly, because I lie. But I was also accepted into the Peace Corps, and I would have been placed in Ukraine. I chose law school instead, and now I'm not really even trying to practice anymore. You mentioned we were in Sochi in 2014 when Russia first invaded Crimea, and what we saw there were Russians and Ukrainians during that conflict who came to Sochi as spectators and volunteers, and there was so much joy. And I share that just to illustrate my personal history. I have a personal history with those two countries, and we have friends in both countries. Now, I think where the media is failing, where we're being failed today is what we're not seeing and not hearing about. We see the stories of countless devastation in Ukraine with people's lives being destroyed, torn apart, families being torn apart, historic structures, hospitals, schools, and more being destroyed. Those are the images that are causing many people to really look at Russia as a whole, to paint the whole country of Russia with a broad stroke. But what we're not hearing about are the stories of Russians who are a lot more knowledgeable, who have an understanding of this war. Those are the people who are fleeing and trying to immigrate to other countries because they, are disagreeing with this war, some quite vocally. We're not hearing those stories, and we're not hearing the stories of the people who are receiving the bodies of the loved ones who were fighting in Putin's war and lost their lives. We're not seeing their sadness, and so I always want to remind everyone, we cannot charge citizens with the sins of their governments. We have to remember to separate the acts of government leaders with regular citizens who may not know anything because media is being controlled, as you may have heard, by Putin. And so there's not a truthful understanding in Russia of what's happening. Putin has some diehard supporters, as this country did a few years ago and continues. And I can't speak to those people, but there are a lot of people who just don't know any better. And so, I always remind myself, to put the humanity in the human, remember the humanity in other humans. And so, what I think we're not seeing in the news right now may be impacting some people's views of Russian. I've heard a couple of people say, oh, I hate all Russians. That's kind of dangerous, it's like all Russians are not, in support of this war. They just don't know. And so, I'm grateful for this talk, supporting the Ukrainian people. That, just to be clear, I think Putin is a disgusting human being. I think there's a special place somewhere down there being prepared for him. And I really hope the world comes together and charges that man with the war crimes that he's committing right now. But I also do not believe that his acts reflect wholly on the Russian community.
It's interesting, Tonya. Just about a few weeks ago, I was shocked when a concert by a Russian conductor or whatever here in Montreal was canceled because he was Russian. And it was like, oh my God, that's what we did. The Asian people when COVID started, and
right.
Exactly what you're saying. And it's very interesting you say about how governments sometimes cause the conflict. Where I live in Montreal, and Diane's here too, and there isn't a problem between the French and the English here. We all get along, we speak Franglais, we're friends, we're neighbors, we together. But the government and the newspapers would have you believe that we're at each other's throats. And every little move they make in one direction, it's just awful, because when you live on the ground, there's nothing. I mean, I don't know about you, Diane, but I've not come across any English bias, and my French is terrible. And I'm not 100% bilingual, and I suffer through, and I've not had a problem in 40 years. So yes, it's exactly the way it's painted that we start believing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right, Sandra. I get comments all the time about, I hear it's really difficult if you don't speak English and people aren't really nice to you. And, I heard somebody who went and they had a really hard time because they didn't speak English. And honestly, almost everybody will make an attempt to be nice to you. So, and it reminds you of when you travel, it's the same thing in the other countries. You can't assume that what you're reading, and I really like this discussion. It's forcing me to think about actually trying to contact people on the ground to get input from them.
Yeah.
That was a good suggestion.
And Diane, you were
sorry.
You were talking earlier about how do you make a decision to go or not go based on the information. Every single word you said, I could have said that has to do with COVID and not travel. Should I go? Should I go? Who do I believe? What are my boundaries? How safe? How not safe? Every single word you said, was a different discussion. So just think what you've done about the disease and gone to Mexico, wherever you are, Arizona.
Yeah.
Think about that in terms of travel. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, actually, because a lot of people are grappling with, should I fly to so-and-so place? There's a spike in COVID, and I think the same level of common sense that you would use, traveling to a country that you've not been before, you use with that consideration. Sure, go, wear your mask. Stay a safe distance, just exercise a little bit of caution. And so with that mindset, I think that frees you to make those travel decisions. And, and I like to say, one of my favorite sayings is a Tonya-ism is, you don't go to war with people you break bread with. And so if you have an opportunity, to acclimate, I guess, yourself to another culture, go to a local restaurant that serves that ethnic cuisine, say hello to somebody that doesn't look like you. And I guarantee you within 5 minutes, you'll find some commonalities. There's a lot of power in the word hello, in the greeting hello. One thing I wanted to, I see we're, golly, can we go longer than an hour, Carolyn? This has been great. I'm so grateful for you all. But I wanted to ask you this question, and it's something, I just thought about last night. is I wonder if the weeds that are growing in our garden, in our world garden, or the voices, you know, that are inundating our thoughts. What's your thought about those same things and how they impact us, you know, in our growth? And, you know, do you think they give voice to the imposter inside? And, you know, we all grapple. I grapple with an imposter. I call her Agnes. I talk to her constantly and tell her to shut up. Sometimes she answers back. So I'm not crazy, but it's just my process of dealing with her. But do you think, you know, some of the same voices that hold us back from doing something like traveling to another country also hold us back from acting on something we want to achieve?
Well, it's the same personality. If you're anxious and worried about your sort of everyday thing, you're going to be maybe anxious and worried about your travel. So you have to learn how to undo that weed.
I think that's the, you know, the coulda, shoulda, woulda people. You know, they're you're not going to do something, and if you're not fully secure in what you want to do or what you're looking at doing, you're going to make up any excuse to not do it. It may not be the same weeds, but you're gonna sabotage yourself,
right?
Some way. But that's already a person that's, oh, I wish I could go somewhere, but they're still on their couch 10 years later because they haven't, you know. But it's going to be that's the nature of the person to begin with, I think.
I'm glad that person isn't in this group right now.
Wait, Tonya, you can change. And I've told this group before that before my travel was as an A personality, and I had my to-do list, and I didn't want to miss everything, and I want to get every restaurant and whatever. And now my travel is, it's the pandemic actually that changed my head and taught me how to be in the moment. I'm just gonna go there. And so you can evolve, you can change.
Mm-hmm. And I'll thank you for that. And I'll just share with you, I think with Diane, you were thinking about India, you want to go to India. India is one of those countries, and there's been a few, but India is one of those countries where I cried when I left. It was just that almost spiritual. And I cannot articulate what I felt. I went there for a speaking engagement, and so the conference was 9 days long. I didn't really, I did go out, but I was kind of confined to the conference. But when I did go out and I viewed, you know, some of the, of course, the iconic structures, the Taj Mahal, the Lotus Palace, but also went into the street and shopping and interacted with people, there was just something about that experience that transformed me. And I have heard that from so many people. It's not just my experience, but I've heard that from others. And so when you go, and I really hope you do go, and I have friends I can put you in touch with, you know, just lean into that and enjoy those moments. So, you know, exercising caution. I did have one incident with an Indian man, but I said, look, I'm married, and he, you know, apologized and went away. But, you know, that was the only, and it was like a 5-minute out of the entire 9 days I was there. It's a 5-minute episode. I think you will enjoy it incredibly. So please go, and I'll share that with everybody. You know, if you're concerned about another culture and interacting, acclimate yourself beforehand and find somebody that's part of that culture, and just talk to them, get to know them here. And when you go, you'll leave with a greater understanding of the culture when you're there. And then find your own truth. Don't listen to the media, except for World Footprints, we're truthful, but don't listen to, you know, mainstream media, because the majority of their focus is to generate revenue, and they do that by sensationalizing stories.